The story begins on September 4, 1893. Local law enforcement made their way to a remote farmhouse in Birmingham, New York, after neighbors started voicing concerns about the sudden and unexplained absence of Paul Halliday. What they uncovered would not only horrify the community but would also give rise to the chilling legend of a woman whose name would haunt the annals of American crime. Hidden beneath piles of hay in the barn, officers discovered the bodies of two women, both victims of gunshot wounds. These women were Margaret and Sarah McQuillan, both from New York, and both with ties to the enigmatic Lizzie Halliday. Yet, this gruesome find was only the start of a much darker tale. Just days after the initial discovery, the mutilated remains of Paul Halliday were found concealed under the floorboards of his own home. He, too, had been shot, the scene suggesting a cold and calculated execution. Suspicion immediately fell on the person still present at the property, Lizzie Halliday, Paul's wife. She was swiftly arrested, but when questioned, Lizzie's behavior was bizarre and unsettling. She tore at her clothing and rambled incoherently, leaving investigators to wonder if she was truly insane or simply putting on an act. This disturbing conduct would soon become a hallmark of her infamy as one of America's most notorious female serial killers. But this was not where Lizzie's story began. This was merely the moment when the nation first became aware of the woman who would be remembered as one of the deadliest criminals of the 19th century. As authorities dug into Lizzie's past, they uncovered a trail of death and destruction that stretched across several states and possibly included more than one husband. The horrors discovered at that Catskill farmhouse were just the surface of a case that would grip the country and challenge long-held beliefs about women and violence. Eliza Margaret McNally was born around 1859 in County Antrim, Ireland, into a life marked by hardship and deprivation. Her family immigrated to the United States when she was still a child, though accounts differ on whether she was 3 or 8 years old at the time. The McNallys settled in New York City, joining the throngs of Irish immigrants hoping for a better future in America. Lizzie grew up in the crowded tenements of New York, quickly earning a reputation that set her apart from other children. She was described as a natural troublemaker, with a dark streak that seemed to emerge early in her life. The bustling, chaotic neighborhoods of Manhattan in the 1860s and 1870s provided the perfect environment for a troubled child to go unnoticed by society. Life in the McNally household was tough, much like that of many immigrant families struggling to survive in the rapidly changing cities of America. The specifics of Lizzie's childhood are shrouded in mystery, but whatever happened during those early years clearly shaped her into someone far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. By the time she reached adulthood, Lizzie was already showing signs of the behaviors that would later be recognized as red flags. She was manipulative, could be charming when it suited her, and had an uncanny ability to make herself seem like the victim in any situation. These qualities would serve her well as she embarked on a deadly path. In 1879, at the age of 20, Lizzie married her first husband, a man from Greenwich, New York, who went by the name Charles Hopkins, though his real identity was Ketpool Brown. They had a son together, but tragedy seemed to follow Lizzie wherever she went. Hopkins died in 1881, and their son would eventually be placed in an institution, a heartbreaking outcome that would later raise questions about Lizzie's abilities as a mother. At the time, Hopkins' death was believed to be from natural causes, but as Lizzie's pattern of behavior became clearer, investigators began to wonder if he had been her first victim. The young widow showed little sign of mourning and wasted no time in seeking out another husband, a pattern that would repeat itself throughout her life, a string of dead or abandoned husbands and a seeming inability to maintain any stable relationship. Shortly after Hopkins' death, Lizzie married Artemus Brewer, a pensioner who appeared to offer her the security she desired. Like her first husband, Brewer's time with Lizzie was short. He died less than a year after their marriage. Again, no suspicions were raised at the time, and Lizzie was free to continue her deadly cycle. Her third husband, Hiram Parkinson, proved to be either luckier or more perceptive. He left Lizzie within their first year of marriage, perhaps sensing something dangerous about her. Lizzie's pattern of moving from one relationship to the next continued. She soon married George Smith, a war veteran who had served alongside her previous husband, Brewer. But Smith's military instincts may have saved his life. After Lizzie allegedly tried to poison him by slipping arsenic into his tea, he survived the attempt, and Lizzie quickly disappeared, fleeing to Vermont. There, she married Charles Plaisdell, but her restless and unpredictable nature couldn't be contained. She vanished just 2 weeks after their wedding, leaving behind another bewildered and possibly relieved husband. By the winter of 1888, Lizzie had reappeared in Philadelphia, this time using the alias Maggie Hopkins. She found shelter at a saloon on North Front Street, run by the McQuillan family, Irish friends from her homeland. It was in Philadelphia that Lizzie's criminal activities became bolder and more visible. She opened a shop, but it was nothing more than a front for insurance fraud. When investigators discovered she had deliberately set fire to her own business to collect the insurance payout, she was sentenced to 2 years in Philadelphia's Eastern State Penitentiary. This conviction marked the first time Lizzie faced serious consequences for her actions, but it would hardly be the last. Her time in one of America's most infamous prisons should have been a turning point, but for Lizzie it was merely a temporary setback. Upon her release, she was ready to reinvent herself once again and seek out her next victim. In 1889, now calling herself Lizzie Brown, she became the housekeeper for Paul Halliday, a twice-widowed 70-year-old farmer living in Birmingham, New York, with his sons. Paul was a prosperous man with considerable property, making him an appealing target for someone with Lizzie's ambitions. Eventually the two married, but their relationship was troubled from the very beginning. Paul described Lizzie as having unpredictable spells of insanity. These were not just mood swings, but episodes of deeply disturbing behavior that should have served as warnings. Within 2 years of their marriage, the Halliday family's house and barn mysteriously burned down. Lizzie was suspected of arson, but proving her guilt was another matter. She had become adept at sowing doubt about her involvement, always managing to present herself as a victim of circumstance. Her criminal activities escalated beyond arson. She stole a team of horses and convinced a neighbor to help her drive them to Newburgh, New York, where she sold them for cash. When she was arrested for the theft, she was acquitted on the grounds of verdict that showed just how skillfully she could manipulate the legal system by playing the part of a mentally unstable woman when it suited her. The most chilling event occurred in May 1891, when the Halliday house burned down again, this time killing Paul's intellectually disabled son, John. Lizzie claimed that John had died heroically while trying to save her from the flames, painting herself as a grieving stepmother who had witnessed a tragic accident. However, investigators soon discovered that John's bedroom door had been locked from the outside and that Lizzie had the key. This evidence suggested that John had been deliberately trapped in his room and left to die in the fire. Shortly after John's death, Lizzie set fire to the Halliday barn and mill as well, completing her destruction of Paul's property. She tried to run away with another man but was caught and sent to an asylum. Her stay there was brief. After being transferred to a second institution, she was declared cured and released, returning home to Paul, who would soon pay the ultimate price for trusting her. Paul Halliday disappeared in August 1893. When neighbors asked about his whereabouts, Lizzie calmly told them he had gone to a nearby town for masonry work. At first her story seemed believable, but as days passed with no word from Paul, suspicions grew. The neighbors knew Paul as a reliable man who would have sent word if he'd been delayed. Around the same time, Margaret and Sarah McQuillan arrived to stay with the Hallidays. These were the same McQuillans who had helped Lizzie during her time in Philadelphia, the family who had given her shelter when she was using the name Maggie Hopkins. Their visit seemed like a reunion of old friends, but it would prove to be a fatal mistake. What happened next would become one of the most infamous crimes of the 19th century. When authorities finally secured a search warrant and arrived at the Halliday property on September 4, 1893, they uncovered a scene that would horrify the nation. Margaret and Sarah McQuillan were found buried beneath hay in the barn, both killed by gunshots. The careful way their bodies had been hidden suggested that the killer had taken time to plan the disposal of evidence. Just a few days later, Paul Halliday's mutilated body was discovered under the floorboards of his own house. He, too, had been shot, but his body bore additional signs of violence, indicating that his killer had continued the attack even after he was dead. The brutality of the scene was shocking, not only for the violence itself but for what it revealed about the person responsible. This was not a crime committed in a moment of rage or desperation. It was the work of someone who was comfortable with murder, someone who had likely killed before. The way the bodies were positioned, the attempts to hide them, and the complete lack of remorse all pointed to a calculating killer who saw human life as disposable. When authorities arrived, Lizzie was nowhere to be found. She had vanished into the wilderness, but her disappearance only made her look more guilty. A massive manhunt began, with law enforcement from several states joining the search for one of America's most wanted fugitives. This time, however, there would be no escape. Lizzie was soon captured and taken into custody, but her behavior in jail would become almost as notorious as her crimes. She refused to eat, attacked the sheriff's wife, set her own bed on fire, and made several attempts to end her own life, including trying to hang herself and slashing her throat with broken glass. When asked about her self-inflicted wounds, she chillingly replied, "I thought I would cut myself to see if I would bleed." Her jailers were forced to chain her to the floor for the remainder of her stay in the Sullivan County Jail. Whether her erratic behavior was genuine mental illness or a calculated act to support an insanity defense became a topic of heated debate. Some believed she was truly unstable, while others thought she was manipulating the system, just as she had manipulated her victims. While Lizzie was in jail, her case attracted national attention. Sensational stories about her appeared in newspapers across the country. The New York World described her case as unprecedented, almost without parallel in the history of crime. The famous journalist Nellie Bly managed to interview Lizzie, during which Lizzie revealed details about her previous marriages, facts that Bly was able to confirm independently. The Sullivan County Sheriff added to the media frenzy by telling reporters that Lizzie might be connected to the Jack the Ripper murders in London, although there was never any evidence to support this claim. The comparison to the world's most notorious serial killer shows just how deeply Lizzie's crimes had captured the public's imagination. As investigators dug deeper into Lizzie's past, the full extent of her criminal career began to emerge. It was revealed that she had been married 5 times before marrying Paul Halliday, that 2 of her previous husbands had died within a year of their weddings, and that she had tried to poison a third. The press speculated about even more murders. The New York Times noted in June 1894 that it was unclear whether these men had died of natural causes or had been murdered. Margaret McQuillan had made the difficult journey from Ireland to America, seeking the same opportunities that brought millions of immigrants to the United States. She had survived the hardships of starting over in a new country and was known in her community as a hard-working woman who helped others whenever she could. Her connection to Lizzie went back to Philadelphia, where the McQuillan family had offered Lizzie shelter and friendship during her time as Maggie Hopkins. Sarah McQuillan, Margaret's companion, was a young woman with dreams of building a better life in America. She was described as cheerful and optimistic, someone who always looked for the good in people and situations. When the chance came to stay with the Hallidays, it seemed like a perfect opportunity for both women to find stable housing and contribute to the household. Paul Halliday was a respected figure in his community, a man who had built a successful farm through years of hard work and perseverance. Having been widowed twice, he understood the importance of companionship and was known for his generosity toward those in need. His decision to marry Lizzie and later welcome the McQuillan women into his home was a testament to his charitable spirit and his desire to help fellow immigrants. Tragically, it was this very kindness and trust that led to the deaths of all 3 victims. They had opened their doors and hearts to someone they believed needed help, never imagining that their generosity would ultimately cost them their lives. On June 21, 1894, Lizzie Halliday was convicted in the Sullivan County Osher and Terminer Court for the murders of Margaret and Sarah She became the first woman in New York State to be sentenced to death by electrocution in the newly introduced electric chair. The trial became an international sensation, with reporters from around the world covering every detail and analyzing every aspect of the case. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Lizzie's guilt, including physical evidence from the crime scene, witness testimony about her suspicious behavior, and expert analysis of the brutal murder. The defense tried to argue that Lizzie was mentally unstable and therefore not responsible for her actions, but the calculated nature of her crimes and her calm demeanor throughout the trial made this claim difficult to believe. During the proceedings, Lizzie showed no remorse for her actions. She seemed more interested in the media attention than in the seriousness of the charges against her. Occasionally, she would display erratic behavior that some interpreted as signs of mental illness, but others saw these outbursts as calculated attempts to avoid responsibility. The jury deliberated for less than a day before returning guilty verdicts on multiple counts of murder. The speed of their decision reflected both the strength of the evidence and the horrific nature of the crimes. When the death sentence was announced, Lizzie remained cold and emotionless, just as she had throughout the entire ordeal. The verdict made headlines across the country and around the world, as Lizzie became the first woman ever sentenced to die in the electric chair. Her case sparked debates about gender, justice, and the death penalty that would continue long after the trial ended. Despite her death sentence, Lizzie's story did not end there. Governor Roswell P. Flower commuted her sentence to life in a mental institution after a medical commission declared her insane. She was sent to the Massachusetts State Hospital for the criminally insane, where she would spend the rest of her life. At first, Lizzie became what the staff considered a model patient. She was trusted with sewing privileges, which gave her access to various tools, including scissors. This trust, however, would prove to be a fatal mistake. Lizzie formed a close bond with Nellie Wicks, one of the attendants at Mashawan, developing what appeared to be a genuine friendship with the woman who cared for her daily. But when Nellie announced her plans to leave the institution, Lizzie became deeply upset. Unable to cope with the loss of someone she had grown attached to, Lizzie made a decision that would forever cement her reputation as irredeemably dangerous. In 1906, she killed Nellie Wicks by stabbing her 200 times with a pair of scissors. This brutal murder showed that Lizzie's violent tendencies were not limited to her relationships with men or motivated solely by financial gain. She seemed to kill whenever she faced a situation she couldn't control, revealing a level of psychological disturbance that made her one of the most dangerous criminals of her time. The sheer savagery of the attack, 200 stab wounds, demonstrated that even after years in an institution, her capacity for extreme violence had not diminished. Lizzie Halliday died of Bright's disease on June 28, 1918, after spending nearly half her life in the asylum. Her death marked the end of one of the most notorious criminal careers in American history, but her legacy continued to shape how society viewed female criminals and mental illness. Lizzie's case challenged the conventional wisdom about women and violence, forcing people to confront the reality that women could be just as capable of brutal, calculated murder as men. Her story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions based on gender, stereotypes, and the importance of thorough investigation. No matter how innocent a suspect might appear, the media coverage of her case set the tone for true crime reporting for decades to come. Sensational headlines, graphic descriptions of violence, and a focus on the killer's psychology became standard elements of crime journalism. Lizzie Halliday became one of America's first celebrity criminals, and her infamy outlasted her life. Even today, more than a century after her crimes, Lizzie Halliday remains a subject of fascination for true crime fans and criminologists alike. Her case is studied as an early example of a female serial killer and continues to offer insights into the psychology of murder and the evolution of criminal investigation. Thank you for watching. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories like this one. The dark history of American crime is filled with cases that will shock and captivate you, and we're here to bring you the most compelling true crime stories from across the centuries.